Who is the survivor after collapse? In the aftermath of narcissistic abuse, survivors often describe a harrowing identity crisis. Not just the loss of a relationship, but a sudden and terrifying sense that they no longer know who they are. The core experience is not merely grief, but symbolic disintegration. As both Professor Sam Vaknin and mirrored psychic inversion theory assert in complementary ways, what collapses is not simply love or attachment, but the internal structure that held the self in place. Let's explore the emergence, structure, and fracture point of the survivor's false self, aiming to show that survivors of narcissistic abuse, though not pathological narcissists, may temporarily develop a narcissistic structure of their own, a pseudo-false self erected in desperation, animated by the trauma, and ultimately requiring deconstruction for true recovery. What is the survivor's false self? Vaknin's perspective, reactive narcissism and introject animation. In his work on inverted narcissism and victimology, Vaknin posits that many survivors unconsciously construct a false self as a protective interface with hostile or invalidating environment. Unlike the grandiose false self of the narcissist, which is stable, encompassing, and lifelong, the survivor's version is reactive, situational, and fundamentally insecure. Vaknin argues this structure is created through co-idealization and shared fantasy. The narcissist projects a perfected version of the survivor, who in turn internalizes this projection as a form of validation. Over time, the survivor begins to inhabit this idealized self, conforming to his expectations to maintain access to perceived love and meaning and safety. But when the fantasy collapses through discard, betrayal, or traumatic rupture, this temporary structure implodes, leaving behind a psychic vacuum. What was once stabilizing becomes destabilizing. The survivor, in effect, becomes a narcissistic echo, not behaviorally, but structurally. M. Pitt's perspective. Reflexive Mirrored Psychic Inversion, RMPI. M. Pitt expands this insight into a clinical sequence. It proposes that the survivor undergoes a symbolic inversion of ego structure under sustained relational trauma, particularly narcissistic abuse. This process, called reflexive mirrored psychic inversion (RMPI), involves idealization of the narcissist, the libidinal gaze, construction of a redeemer ego, the self who can fix or earn love, internalization of the narcissist projected interjects, cold empathy, contempt, shame, collapse of internal symbolic coherence, object constancy failure, emergence of a pseudo-false self mimicking narcissistic structure but fueled by abandonment terror, not supply seeking. In MPIT, this pseudo-false self is not pathological, it is survival, but it becomes symbolically toxic when mistaken for the real self. The survivor's false self is formed within a hall of mirrors, distorted reflections of how the narcissist sees them, how they want to be seen, and how they've come to see themselves. It is composed of the following layers. The idealized echo. The survivor internalizes the narcissist gaze. You are perfect for me. The redeemer ego. The part that believes, I can save this, I can fix them, I am the answer. False self mask. The survivor's adaptive shell. Performative competence, compassion, regulation, and calm. The introjected narcissist. The inner critic echoing the abuser. You're not enough. You failed. The mute child core. The original vulnerable self. Silenced, buried, and unseen. This structure is non-sustainable. It is kept alive through constant scanning, performance, and idealization. When the narcissist leaves or when the fantasy breaks, this fragile configuration begins to collapse. Collapse and decompensation. The collapse of the survivor's false self is often mistaken for depression, anxiety, or panic, but Empit and Vaknin both propose this is actually a symbolic regression. The self reverting to a pre-false self state where affective regulation is no longer accessible. Symptoms include emotional flatback without narrative content, derealization, depersonalization, dysregulation of affect, crying, rage, shutdown, loss of narrative authority, I don't know what's real, obsessive scanning for the narcissist gaze, or substitute mirrors. Facton refers to this as withdrawal from the shared fantasy, akin to a narcissistic mortification, but experienced by the victim. Empit maps this moment as a symbolic fracture point, when the survivor realizes that even their own sense of self was co-constructed by the narcissist. This is the moment of internal betrayal, the discovery that the self was constructed under another